Okay, so for this one, we're going to go on to Liquify, which really is um, the lifeblood of my method of photo manipulating. So, what we've got is a head that we need to reshape, and probably neck as well, because animal heads do not look good with human neck proportions. So, um, we use Liquify for this. It's really nice that you have Liquify to begin with. When I started photo manipulating, I did not know that Liquify existed. So, I used smudge and clone stamp for stuff, and it looked all very smudgy. Liquify is nice. It basically allows you to drag around bits of the image and reshape them. So, to begin, we are going to make another selection. So since I'm going to be changing the head and neck, I'm going to select this entire area with the neck muscles and the head. Voila, all selected. And I'm going to copy that into a new layer and paste it. I don't want to cut it because I want the stuff under it still. Okay, so now we've got a head layer. We can actually go over here in this window, double click the name of the layer and name it head and neck. Let's do that. Great. Okay. So what you do next really depends on the animal that you're doing. However, there are very few animals in which you can see the cheek, the opposite cheek. So what I often do is I get rid of that completely. So I go to Eraser, and here I guess I can talk about this. You've got opacity and flow, just like with everything. But let me talk about brush. Master diameter is how wide the brush is completely. Hardness only applies to round brushes. And that just means how fuzzy it is around the edges. So if I have a hardness of 0, you'll see that it just has a very hard edge. And that's what I want to use on this one. But just to demonstrate, if you took the hardness down to about 50%, you have a fuzzier edge, right? And if I took it down to 0%, it's almost completely fuzzy. There's nothing left. But let's bring it up to 100%. So I'm just going to delete this entire cheek because we don't want it. We will not see that on the caribou, and it will probably mess up, and part of the lips too, because we won't see the other side of the lips. Because it'll mess up the caribou's profile when we try to create it in Liquify. And I guess here it depends on what animal it is. Because on a caribou, you won't see this other eye at this angle. You might see the eyebrow, but you definitely won't see the eye. On animals such as wolves or cats or predators in general, things with binocular vision, or a lot of binocular vision, you will probably see both eyes because they're both forward-facing. And I guess this comes down to how accurate you want your anatomy to be. I like to have, at least on my herbivores, the nose come up between the eyes. So even if they have binocular vision as anthros, from one side you can't see both eyes. So we're just going to delete this eye. And it'll look really weird for a moment. Okay, notice it looks really strange, but this is all we need to make him look like a caribou. So and we'll get to the ear later. I typically pull that into another layer. And we're going to keep the hair for now. if you don't want the hair, you just erase that like everything else. And you end up with a really weird looking head. But the nice thing is that in Liquify you can reshape that into any shape you'd like. So actually, okay, I'm going to actually duplicate this layer, and I'm going to create one with the hair and without the hair. So the duplicated one will be without the hair. And I'll see if I can demonstrate how to do that. Or I guess it's just the same techniques, just a little more extreme. So we'll get rid of all the indications of hair on the skin. Great. But for now, we're going to operate with the one with the hair. Oh, and over in the layer menu, you can click this little eye next to a layer to make it invisible. It's really nice. Anyway, so we're going to mess with the head and neck one. And we're going to open the Liquify tool. The Liquify tool opens in a new window. And what I'm going to do is, well, let me make this visible again. You see the eye came back because that's in the layer below it. But in the layer we'll be working on, there is no eye. I'm going to select a part of the image that fits everything that we'll be liquefying, including the future snout. We have to keep room for that. We'll go up to Filter and click Liquify. The reason why I made this selection is I don't want to manipulate the entire image. I just want to manipulate parts of it. Okay, actually, I'm going to quit out of Liquify. I'm going to change the size of this image. This is really large. And Liquify doesn't have the power to move more than like 600 pixels at once. Besides, that takes a long time as it is. So, what I'm going to do once Photoshop comes back to me... Okay. Let this be a lesson. I am going to save now. There we go. I don't want to start over. Control S would be save. And you want to do that frequently. Okay. Saving. And actually, let's reduce the size of the image. So we'll go up to Image, go down to Image Size. And notice, we're 4,000 pixels high. We don't need that. We're going to shrink it down to about 2,500. That should be sufficient. Okay. So that'll allow us a little more control in the Liquify window. So we'll make our selection again. And we'll go into Filter, Liquify. Okay, so in this one thing that's really nice about CS2 is it allows you to see the layers under the stuff that you're manipulating. If you notice, when I move this around, I can still see the layer underneath. So I'm just using the finger smudge tool, the forward warp tool, which basically allows you to drag stuff around. And I'm just being silly with it now. Although, it is funny how you can alter a person's facial features to look cartoony. Anyway, we're going to click Restore All. That'll bring it back to what it normally is. And just so you know, you can go down here, unclick Show Backdrop, then you see the only the layer that you're working on, which is the way it is in Photoshop Elements. And you can also use different layers and different opacities. You can play with that. Anyway, okay, I am going to manipulate this guy. So we need to use this. Let's zoom in a little bit with the zoom tool. And we've got to do some pretty radical reshaping of the head. One of the major things that you need to consider is that animal heads do not have this big bulbous area for brains. And stay with me, anthros are a little different. They have, intelligence and brains and smarts. We're going to shrink the head and move the eyes up to make room for the snout. Otherwise, it looks like there's just a small snout coming out of this giant head. Okay, let me introduce you to some of the brush options in Liquify. So you've got brush size over here, which is, of course, the size of the circle. Brush density, which is like hardness with eraser brushes or paint brushes. So the higher the number, the more it grabs. Think about it as finger painting. If you put your finger down and just kind of drag very lightly across the surface, not much paint will come along. And you'll end up with a very small dot near the end. But if you push hard, you will end up with a line. That's what brush density is like. So let me show you 0. If I pull on it, we'll put the brush pressure up a little bit. 0, see, it only pulls out the middle of the circular area. Brush density to 100, it pulls the entire area, all the way to the edges of the brush. Brush pressure is how hard it pulls on all those areas. See, if you pull brush pressure up to the top, it pulls a lot. If you put brush pressure down to the bottom, it barely moves at all. So one of the things you want to do with brush pressure at the really low would be to change eyes, or like irises and pupils, because the slightest change in those can make you look terrible, or your subject rather. What I use brush pressure on higher levels, around 80 or so, is moving like the entire eye around the head. If you want to preserve detail, that's what you do. Okay, so let's shrink the head. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate something else. We're going to talk a little bit about masking. Masking is selecting an area that you do not want to change. So I don't want, as we're going around with the head, I don't want us to mess with the eyes. I want the eyes to remain intact, because those are very sensitive to manipulation. You mess with the eyes and like stuff can get weird. And I'll keep the ear for now. So I've painted these areas so they will not be changed when I go in to warp the head. So I'm just going to use the shortcut to increase the size of the brush. I'll go in and get the eyebrow. I don't want the eyebrow to be smushed. And you can erase the layer mask or the mask by using this eraser thing. Okay, so let's go up here and shrink the head. And so if you'll notice, the places where I've marked red don't actually change, which is super nice. We'll do more with the ear a little later, because it doesn't look like a caribou ear at all. But notice we've got a much more animalistic looking head right now. We'll actually get rid of the show backdrop. Perfect. Great. So let's get rid of the layer, the mask right there. And let's give him a... Actually, let's give him a more animalistic neck. So we don't want to exactly expand the middle of the neck, these muscles areas, but we do want to expand the trapezius and the outside contours of the neck. So let's go over here. Let's do the pull, and we're going to pull this stuff out. And we're going to go over here and do the same thing, except we have to be careful because we don't want to mess with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically push up. So it doesn't appear to change the other bits, like the neck bits that we want to remain the same. But it actually, but it allows us to make some subtle changes. Okay, we'll go down here. Let's hit 100%. Voila! We've got a much thicker caribou-looking neck. Okay, now let's give him a snout. So what I want to do is I want to move this eye over a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll go into brush density, I'll stick that on high, brush pressure, stick that on high. That'll allow me to move the eye without losing detail. See, got the entire thing and grabbed it and moved it over. Let's actually move it up a little bit as well. There we go. Now, let's use the mask tool so we don't mess with the eye when we're messing with the rest of the face. Just the... oh, whoa. No. We want the mask tool. So we'll keep that all the same. There we go. Don't want to change that. Alright. Now let's get to moving all the rest of this stuff around. Well, we shouldn't actually be able to see a lot of this eyebrow, so let's shrink that a bit. Good. Let's shrink the forehead because animals often don't have big foreheads. Now, let's widen the bridge of the nose. Good. There we go. And now we're ready to make the snout. So if you'll notice, I'm going to, again, grab with a high brush pressure. It'll get a bigger, actually, let me select some areas where I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to mess up the neck. Okay, now let me pull this entire thing out. Okay, we'll want to make sure that the nose shape matches with the forehead shape. Because that's basically what you want when you're making a deer. You need to have the nose and the forehead kind of meld together. We need to shrink the chin because Animals typically don't have that strong of chins. Actually, let me pull up one of the caribou references that I found, just to make sure I get the shape right. Great. If you notice, we've got a little chin and this big square nose. So I'm just going to get it to look like that. Got to mess with the mouth a little bit. We want to keep the smile. You can pull that up. But mostly we need to make sure that the nose that the edge of the nose is straight. That's one of the biggest things. And then let's make sure that the nostril gets the right shape. And you'll notice that we don't actually have... We'll need to go in and fix some of these things. We've got a lot of extra shadows and lights where they shouldn't be, because they're preserved from the human shape. Let's round out the chin a little bit more. We'll need to get rid of some of the lips because, well, animals don't have pouted lips like we do, or protruding lips. But if you'll notice, we've got the shape about right. Zoom out. He's looking kind of like a caribou. Let's actually shrink the snout down a bit more. We might end up wanting to move the eye back a little bit. So let's get rid of that. Let's zoom in and do some very subtle changing on the eye. Okay. Now that I've got it into the right shape, I often go in and correct the shading with a couple tools. Okay, it's going to bring up our... There we go. New caribou head. Okay, I'm going to delete the human head behind this guy, so we don't have that interfering. Okay. Okay, we want to fix this because there's that shade under the eye, under the brow, where it meets the nose. We're going to go in and use clone stamp. So let's set it at a medium opacity. That way we can correct the lighting without doing anything drastic. And okay, with clone stamp, this might be a good time to introduce some of the other features. So if you go up here, you see mode, normal. There are lots of things that you can do with clone stamp. The other ones that I like to use are either darken or lighten. And what that does is it takes the part of your selection and only changes what it only stamps what's lighter than the area that you're stamping to. So if I picked lighter and I selected the eye and went over here, it would only stamp the areas that are lighter. Okay, maybe that was a bad example. Maybe over here. Let's see. See, if you notice, it's not stamping the nostril. That's transparent. But whatever's lighter than the hair, it stamps. Okay. And darker is just the opposite. So that's really nice when you have a specific thing in mind. Okay, we need to get rid of these lines between the nose and the mouth because those don't exist on reindeer. And let's make sure we get rid of this area. We don't need a philtrum. Notice it's looking a lot more caribou-like already. Let's actually diminish the distinctiveness of the upper lip. There we go. And let's get rid of this shadow under the lower lip because that does not exist again on caribou. There we go. Looking a lot more caribou-like now. But he's also looking a little flat. So we're going to use the burn and dodge tools to kind of correct the shadow. But first I'm going to just do a couple more corrections in shape in Liquify. Okay, I need to turn off. I locked the transparency for that bit with the nose, but I need to turn that off because that doesn't work well with Liquify. Okay, what I need to do is I'm going to pull the lower lip back. So an important thing to recognize is that their features need to line up. If your eyes are lined in a certain way, the nostrils should be along the same line. And the bits of the mouth should be along the same line. Let's see how that looks. Okay, we need to move up. Okay, we need to round the nose out a little bit. Pull this front up. And I think we need to pull the entire nose out. Pull it down. Okay. There we go. Looking a lot more caribou-like. So now let's fix some of the lighting. Let's go to this little... So depending on what's selected on, it could be a little hand that looks like it's pinching something, which is burn. And then there's something that looks like a pin that's dodge. I don't know exactly what those... why those are the pictures they use. But yeah. So we're going to fix the shading. Dodge basically makes things darker, and burn makes things lighter. You want to use them very sparingly, though, because they also change the color. They'll get it more saturated. And so you want to, yeah, you want to be careful. There are two options with burn and dodge. One is range, and it can be highlights, midtones, or shadows. Shadows are the darkest colors in an image. Midtones are the middle ones, and highlights are the brightest. That basically means that if you select highlights, and if you have burn on highlights, it'll make the highlights darker. If you have burn on shadows, it'll make the shadows darker, if you notice the difference. Midtones, it'll make the midtones darker. And you can use these to have different effects. And exposure is the other one. Exposure is how heavy the effect is. So the higher the exposure, the darker it gets with the less strokes. The lower the exposure, the less effect there is, which is kind of nice. And I often use them on very low exposures, just to make sure that I don't overpower anything. So we're going to make the nose a little darker. Show there's shade over there. Let's make this under the lip a little darker. I'm using midtones. I actually should be using highlights, I think, because the highlights are the first to go in the shade. There we go. That's looking a little better. We're going to add a little shade right here to emphasize the shape of the snout. I'm going to add a little shade up there. A little shade down there. A little shade around the eye. A little shade down here. A little shade up there. Okay, we're going to fix some of this, but let's go over the dodge. We'll select a round tool, medium hardness, and let's add some light. So we'll want to lighten this up down here. Because it's lighter on the upper lip of a caribou than it is on the upper lip of a human. We'll use it to correct a little bit of our overshadowing. We'll add a little shine on the nostrils. A little more definition. There we go. Now he's looking a little more natural. Actually, let's get rid of a little bit of this shade right here. Okay, that's a little better. Bingo! Looking a lot more like a caribou now. All right. So you got a little sense of how I use liquefy, dodge, and burn to reshape the face. And it really is important to notice how dodge and burn work into that, because liquefy can only go so far without without it starting to just look flat. However, dodge and burn are really important, I think, to kind of filling out the three-dimensional shape of the face or whatever body part you're using. That's also how I add muscle to bodies. I liquefy and then I dodge and burn to make sure that the things that I did have volume. Okay. So, actually, I'll just do the ear right now since we're on liquefy. I'm just cutting out the ear with the magnetic lasso tool. I'm going to copy it into a new layer. And so, if you look, we've got an ear. Woo! Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Let's liquefy this thing. Confession, I think caribou ears are some of the most adorable ones in the animal kingdom. Actually, a lot of the big deer, moose ears are too. So, we'll very gently pull this out. We don't want to disrupt a lot of the shape, inner shape, because we can actually use that. Okay, my references are freezing up. Okay. I just think they're so adorable how they're like kind of small and rounded. Like white-tailed deer ears are regal. Caribou ears are just kind of cute. Go around the edge and actually expand the edge of the ear a little bit. We might have to go in with we'll we'll go in with Liquify later with burn and dodge and furring and all of that to change the color because we don't want it to be so drastic. But right now we're just going for the shape. I think we've got that. Actually, not quite. We need to think three-dimensionally, and if we look, that's as if the ear is pointed back. It should be a little more forward. Okay, Liquify is being slow because my computer is running Manycam and live stream and lots of windows. We actually need to move that up a bit. So let's move it up about here. That's about where the ears are on deer. Notice we have an ear down here. Oops, we have two ears. So what are we going to do? We're going to clone stamp it away. That's right. There we go. we've got an ear, a more caribou-shaped ear, and we got rid of the human ear. And we'll save. So let's get the other ear. So we'll select this layer, the ear, we'll duplicate. And so look, we've got another ear here. Woo! Okay, so we're going to switch sides. So if you notice there are boxes when you select the layer, those allow you to change its shape. And then once you change the shape, it asks you apply the transformation. You can click apply or don't apply. We're not going to apply that one because I was just messing around. But we'll flip it over to the other side, apply that transformation, and then if you drag the layers around, I'll drag this below the head and neck, and if you see, it'll be on the other side now. Voila. And if you'll notice, the ears are rather red. That's because they're full of blood in humans. But we're going to fix that. We're going to mess with the coloration anyway. So, I think we've got all we want to manipulate right now. If you want to, like, make the fingers into, like, 2-fingered hands instead of 5, you can zoom in there and just, what I do is I just mess with the clone stamp tool. So you can mess with that, see how it works. Next, we're going to go into coloration and coloration. Yep. So that's been my actually. Okay, we're going to mess with this a little bit with dodge and burn just to get it to look a little more caribou ear like. Notice I just went up to a higher exposure because I'm just kind of sketching out the values. Let me do shadows to lighten up that area. So just fixing up the ear a little bit. Okay, that looks a little better. It doesn't have to look perfect. I just wanted a little more of the shape than we had. Okay, so now let's duplicate that layer. So now we've got a duplicate. Let's go up to select. We'll flip it around. Move it below. Move it over. Apply transformation. There we go. All right. Cool. So there you have it. Liquify and reshaping. Save that. We'll go on to the next video.